Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin with a truth that will set you free tonight. You are losing sleep over battles God has already won. You are carrying burdens that heaven has already lifted. You are rehearsing problems in your mind that God has already solved. Overthinking is the enemy of faith because it magnifies problems and minimizes trust in God. When a challenge arises in life, the natural instinct of the human mind is to analyze, calculate, and rehearse every possible scenario. We go over the details again and again, imagining outcomes that haven't even happened yet. And in the process, we create unnecessary fear. Overthinking doesn't bring clarity, it brings confusion. It takes a small issue and inflates it until it looks like a giant. Faith, on the other hand, requires trust. It asks us to release the need for control and believe that God is already in charge of the outcome. Where faith whispers, "Be still and trust," overthinking shouts, "You need to fix this yourself right now." The two cannot coexist because one relies on surrender while the other thrives on self-dependence. The reason overthinking is so dangerous is that it steals your peace before the battle even begins. You are already defeated in your mind long before you see the result. Faith, however, gives you strength even in uncertainty. It reminds you that you don't have to carry the burden alone. But when overthinking takes root, it replaces peace with restlessness, joy with fear, and hope with anxiety. You begin to lose sleep, replay conversations, and imagine failures that have no foundation in reality. You take a single thought and turn it into a mountain, forgetting that faith has the power to move mountains. Overthinking takes your eyes off God and fixes them on the storm, while faith keeps your focus on the one who calms the storm. Every time you overthink, you step out of the present moment and into a future that doesn't exist yet. You start trying to control tomorrow instead of trusting the one who already holds tomorrow. This is why overthinking is the enemy of faith. It competes with God for control. Faith says, "God is my provider." Overthinking says, "But what if the money doesn't come through?" Faith says, "God will protect me." Overthinking says, "But what if I fail and get hurt?" Faith says, "God has a plan for my life." Overthinking says, "But what if the plan falls apart?" The moment you allow those what ifs to dominate your thoughts, you choke the very seed of faith before it has a chance to grow. When you overthink, you are relying on your limited understanding. You are measuring God's infinite ability by your finite logic. Scripture reminds us not to lean on our own understanding, but overthinking is exactly that. It is leaning too heavily on human reasoning. Faith is not blind, but it does require trust beyond what the eyes can see and the mind can calculate. Overthinking blinds you to possibilities because it convinces you that your logic is the highest authority. Faith opens your eyes to see that God can make a way where there is no way, that His resources are not limited by your circumstances, and that His wisdom is far greater than your calculations. The greatest tragedy of overthinking is that it paralyzes action. Many opportunities are lost not because people lack talent or resources, but because they thought too much and moved too little. Faith moves, even when the path is unclear. Overthinking waits for everything to be perfect, but nothing in life is ever perfect. Faith takes the first step, believing that God will guide the next. Overthinking convinces you that if you don't have all the answers now, you shouldn't act at all. Faith understands that God often reveals answers along the journey, not before it. The danger of overthinking is that it makes you miss divine timing. The opportunity God places in front of you may not wait forever, but while you are still debating in your head, it slips away. Overthinking also has a way of distorting the truth. It magnifies the negative and drowns out the positive. It makes you forget how God has been faithful in the past because you are too busy imagining how He might fail in the future. Faith builds on the history of God's goodness, but overthinking erases that history with fear. Instead of remembering victories, you start forecasting defeats. Instead of standing on promises, you start sinking into doubts. Faith feeds on God's word, but overthinking feeds on your worries. The more you think, the less you trust, and the less you trust, the weaker your faith becomes. The enemy knows that if he can trap you in your thoughts, he can weaken your faith. That is why worry is one of his greatest weapons. He doesn't have to destroy you. He just has to keep your mind so busy that you cannot rest in God. He doesn't have to block your blessing. He just has to make you think it will never come. Overthinking creates mental battles that were never meant to exist, but faith settles the battle before it even starts. When faith rises, peace takes over. When overthinking rises, fear takes over. One leads you closer to God, the other pulls you away. This is why overthinking is not just a bad habit. It is an enemy of faith, an enemy of peace, and an enemy of your destiny. God is already at work behind the scenes, even when it looks like nothing is happening in your life. Many times we look at our circumstances and assume that silence means absence, but with God, silence never means inactivity. Just because you cannot see the movement does not mean God is not moving. Behind every delay, every closed door, and every unanswered prayer, there is divine activity taking place that your natural eyes cannot see. Faith is not about believing what is visible. It is about trusting that the invisible hand of God is orchestrating every detail for your good. When we face challenges, our natural instinct is to worry and question, why isn't anything changing? Why hasn't God answered me yet? But while you are questioning, God is aligning people, circumstances, and opportunities to work together in your favor. You may not see the conversation He is stirring in someone's heart on your behalf, the door He is preparing to open, or the obstacle He is removing before you arrive. You are only seeing the surface, but God is working in the depths. You are only seeing the waiting room, but God is setting the stage for your breakthrough. Life often feels like a puzzle with missing pieces. You wonder how the picture will come together because all you can see are scattered fragments. But God is the master designer who holds every piece, even the ones that don't make sense right now. He sees the end from the beginning, and He knows how to connect the broken, confusing parts of your life into something beautiful. While you are focused on the piece in your hand, God is focused on the masterpiece He is building. One of the greatest examples of God working behind the scenes is found in the story of Joseph. Betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned, Joseph's circumstances looked like one tragedy after another. On the surface, it seemed as if God had abandoned him. But behind the scenes, every pit and prison was leading Joseph closer to the palace. Each setback was actually a setup for his destiny. What others meant for evil, God was quietly turning into good. And when the time was right, Joseph realized that God had been working in silence all along, preparing him to save nations. This is how God operates in our lives as well. He is always arranging, shifting, and aligning things according to His divine timing. Sometimes the delay is protection. Sometimes the closed door is direction. Sometimes the disappointment is actually a redirection towards something greater. But while you are living in the moment, it feels heavy, confusing, and unfair. That is why faith is required. To believe that while you are crying at night, God is working in the morning. While you are asking questions, God is providing answers. While you are waiting for the promise, God is preparing the provision. It is easy to lose faith when you cannot trace God's hand, but that is when you must trust His heart. A child does not always see what the parent is doing behind the kitchen counter, but when the meal is served, the child realizes the preparation had a purpose. In the same way, you may not see the full picture of God's work right now, but when the season changes, you will look back and understand why it had to happen the way it did. Every delay will make sense. Every setback will reveal its purpose. Every unanswered prayer will be replaced with something far better than you imagine. God is never caught off guard by your situation. Long before the problem appeared, He had already crafted the solution. Long before the need arose, He had already prepared the supply. Long before you prayed the prayer, He had already written the answer. This is the power of trusting a God who is not bound by time. You see today, He sees eternity. You see one step. He sees the entire journey. And because He sees it all, He is already working behind the scenes to make sure that everything aligns perfectly for your destiny. The challenge for you is to rest, to believe, and to remain faithful even when you don't see movement. Your waiting season is not wasted. Your prayers are not ignored. Your tears are not overlooked. Heaven is busy on your behalf. What looks like stillness is actually divine strategy. What looks like a delay is actually preparation. And what looks like a dead end is actually a doorway being built behind the curtain of time, waiting for the moment when God will reveal it to you. Your thoughts weigh more than your problems, because most of the pressure you feel in life does not come from the actual situation, but from the way you process it in your mind. A problem on its own may be small, temporary, and manageable. But when you replay it over and over again in your thoughts, you multiply its weight. You carry the burden not only once in reality, but many times in your imagination. The mind has the power to exaggerate what is small, to stretch what is short, and to darken what is light. This is why people often feel crushed by issues that, when solved, turn out to be far less significant than they once seemed. It is not the problem itself that destroys peace. It is the endless cycle of worry, doubt, and fear that makes the problem heavier than it really is. The human mind was designed to be creative, visionary, and full of imagination, but when those same gifts are misused, they turn into a prison. Instead of imagining possibilities, you imagine failures. Instead of creating solutions, you create fear. Instead of building hope, you build anxiety. A financial problem may only require a conversation or a plan, but in your thoughts, you begin to see yourself losing everything, becoming a failure, and never recovering. A health concern may only require a treatment or lifestyle change, but in your thoughts, you play out the worst-case scenarios, imagining yourself defeated before the diagnosis even comes. In this way, the mind becomes heavier than the situation. What you think about constantly will always feel bigger than what you are actually facing. This is why many times, when a problem is finally resolved, people often say, "It wasn't as bad as I thought." That statement reveals the truth that the real struggle was in the mind. The sleepless nights, the stress, and the fear were all byproducts of thought patterns, not of the actual challenge. The problem may have been real, but the suffering was multiplied by mental weight. The way you think about a challenge determines whether you walk through it with peace or collapse under its pressure. Two people can go through the same situation, yet one will remain calm while the other breaks down. Not because the problem is different, but because their thoughts are different. When your thoughts become heavier than your problems, they begin to affect your body, your health, and your relationships. Stress and anxiety caused by overthinking can manifest as headaches, exhaustion, or even sickness. Your mind begins to drain your energy before the problem even demands it. Your focus shifts from solutions to speculations, and you begin to feel tired by battles you have only fought in your head. This is why Scripture warns to guard the mind, because the battlefield is not outside but inside. If you can control your thoughts, you can lighten the load of almost any challenge. If you allow your thoughts to spiral, you will always feel like you are carrying more than you actually are. One of the greatest gifts God has given humanity is the ability to choose what we focus on. The problem may exist, but you have the choice to either magnify it or trust that God is greater than it. When your thoughts are consumed with fear, the problem grows in your eyes. When your thoughts are filled with faith, the problem begins to shrink. You cannot always control what happens to you, but you can control how long you meditate on it and how much weight you give it. The power of your mind is in its focus, and what you focus on will always feel heavier than it really is. It is important to realize that peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of the right thoughts. You may not be able to remove the situation immediately, but you can lighten its weight by choosing not to replay it endlessly in your mind. Instead of carrying it at 100 times in your imagination, carry it once in reality and then release it to God. Trust that He is bigger than the burden. Trust that He can handle what you cannot. The truth is, most of the heaviness you feel today is not from what is happening around you, but from what is happening inside your head. If you can win the battle in your mind, you will discover that the problem was never as heavy as your thoughts made it out to be. Trust the process like a planted seed, because growth and transformation always happen in stages, not in a single moment. When a seed is placed in the ground, it looks as if nothing is happening. From the outside, the soil seems still, quiet, and unchanged, but beneath the surface something powerful is taking place. The seed is breaking open, roots are being established, and life is beginning to push forward. If you were to dig it up too soon, because you were impatient to see progress, you would interrupt the very process that was designed to bring fruit. In the same way, the promises of God, the dreams in your heart, and the breakthroughs you are waiting for require time, patience, and faith. Just because you cannot see immediate results does not mean nothing is happening. What looks like silence is actually preparation, and what feels like delay is often development. Many people struggle with impatience because they want instant results. They want success overnight, answers immediately, and growth without waiting. But life does not work that way, and neither does faith. Just as the seed must remain in the soil through seasons of darkness before it can emerge into the light, you too must go through hidden seasons where God is shaping your character, strengthening your faith, and preparing you for what He promised. The soil season feels uncomfortable because it is lonely, quiet, and hidden, but it is necessary because roots cannot grow in the spotlight. Before God allows you to rise and be seen, He ensures that you are stable enough not to be shaken when storms come. The beauty of trusting the process is that it takes the pressure off your own efforts. You cannot make a seed grow faster by worrying about it, staring at it, or demanding results. Growth is built into the seed itself, and as long as the conditions are right, it will eventually push through. In the same way, when God plants something inside you, the outcome is already built into His promise. Your job is not to force it, but to nurture it with faith, obedience, and patience. Your responsibility is to water it through prayer, feed it with the Word, and protect it from doubt. The timing of the harvest belongs to God, not you. When the season is right, the seed will break the surface and bear fruit. One of the greatest challenges in life is the waiting season, the time between planting and harvesting. This is when people are most tempted to give up because they confuse silence with absence. They think because they cannot see progress that nothing is happening. But the seed is most active in the soil when it looks most inactive to the eye. Roots are spreading, life is forming, and the foundation is being set for something greater. In the same way, God is working behind the scenes in your life in ways you cannot see. He is arranging circumstances, preparing people, and aligning opportunities so that when the moment comes, you will be ready to step into what He has for you. Trusting the process also means resisting the urge to compare your growth with others. Some seeds sprout quickly, others take longer. An oak tree does not grow at the same pace as a flower, but both fulfill their purpose in the right season. If you measure your life by someone else's timeline, you will either feel behind or become discouraged. But if you trust the process God has designed specifically for you, you will remain steady, knowing that your time of harvest is coming. The seed does not need to compete with the tree next to it. It simply needs to keep growing in the soil it was planted in. Every great promise requires a season of faith before it becomes reality. Abraham waited years for his promised son. Joseph endured trials before reaching the palace, and David faced many hardships before becoming king. Each of them was planted like a seed in the soil of obscurity, but in due season, God brought them into the light. Their stories remind us that no waiting season is wasted. Every hidden moment, every test, and every trial was part of the growth process that prepared them for greatness. When you learn to trust the process like a planted seed, you stop living in frustration and start living in faith. You stop asking when and start believing it will happen at the right time. You stop digging up what you planted and instead nurture it with consistency and trust. Growth takes time, but the fruit will always be worth the wait. The soil may look dark and the process may feel slow, but in God's timing, what He planted will break forth, and your life will bear the harvest you have been waiting for. Shifting from what if to even if is one of the most powerful transformations a person can experience in their walk of faith, because it changes the entire posture of the heart. The question, what if, is rooted in fear, doubt, and uncertainty. It imagines failure before success, loss before victory, and disappointment before fulfillment. It keeps the mind trapped in endless scenarios of worry, predicting the worst possible outcomes, and paralyzing a person from moving forward. When you constantly live in the world of what if, You are consumed by anxiety because you are focused on every negative possibility that might never even happen. What if I fail? What if I get rejected? What if I lose everything? What if things don't work out? These questions slowly drain courage and silence faith, because they shift the focus away from God's promises and onto human limitations. The phrase, even if, on the other hand, is the language of faith. It refuses to deny the existence of challenges, but chooses to trust God in the midst of them. Even if I fail, God can still lift me again. Even if I don't see the answer right away, God is still faithful. Even if the storm rages, God is still in control. This mindset does not live in denial. It acknowledges the reality of difficulties, but refuses to let them dictate the outcome. Even if recognizes that God is greater than any circumstance, stronger than any obstacle, and faithful beyond human understanding. It shifts the focus from the problem to the provider, from fear to faith, and from worry to worship. This transformation is critical because fear-based living will always keep you stuck. When you think in terms of what if, you hesitate, delay, and often miss opportunities that God places before you. You wait for perfect conditions that never arrive, and as a result, the seed of your potential remains buried. But when you live with an even if mentality, you are free to step forward in boldness, knowing that your faith is not dependent on everything going perfectly, but on God being present in every situation. This mindset gives you courage to take risks, to trust God with the unknown, and to move forward despite uncertainty. One of the greatest biblical examples of this shift can be seen in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Faced with the fiery furnace, they declared to the king that their God was able to deliver them. But then they added, even if he does not, we will not bow. This is the essence of faith. They did not live with the fear of, what if God doesn't save us? Instead, they lived with the conviction of, if he doesn't, we will still trust him. That kind of faith is unshakable because it is not dependent on outcomes, but on trust in God's sovereignty. When you shift to an even if mindset, you begin to walk in peace instead of panic. Fear thrives on the unknown, but faith thrives on God's promises. Fear imagines defeat before the battle starts, but faith declares victory even before it sees the result. Fear focuses on what could go wrong, but faith focuses on who is in control, no matter what happens. And even if perspective equips you to face life's challenges without being crushed by them, because you know that your foundation is unmovable. This way of thinking also strengthens resilience. Life is unpredictable, and setbacks are inevitable. A what if thinker will be devastated when things don't go as planned. But an even if thinker will remain steady because they already decided to trust God regardless of the outcome. When you live with an even if faith, failure does not define you, disappointment does not destroy you, and delay does not discourage you. You stand strong because your faith is anchored in God's character, not in circumstances. The truth is, every person will face uncertainty, but how you think about it will determine your peace and progress. You can either live enslaved to endless what ifs, or live free with the bold declaration of even if. One keeps you bound in fear while the other releases you into faith. One drains your strength while the other fuels your courage. One makes the problem the focus while the other makes God the center. And when God is the center, you discover that no matter what happens, He is enough, He is able, and He is faithful. Release control and rest in God's peace, because the weight you are carrying was never meant for your shoulders. Human nature often clings tightly to the need for control, constantly trying to manage outcomes, solve every problem, and predict the future. Yet the more control you try to hold, the more anxious and restless you become. Control is an illusion, no matter how hard you try. There will always be circumstances beyond your reach, people you cannot change, and situations you cannot predict. When you live with the pressure of holding everything together, your soul becomes weary, your mind becomes restless, and your spirit becomes heavy. God did not design you to live this way. He designed you to trust Him, to lean on Him, and to allow His peace to carry you where your strength cannot. Releasing control does not mean giving up or becoming passive. It means acknowledging that you are not God. It means admitting that your wisdom is limited, but His is infinite. It means recognizing that while you see only one step ahead, He sees the entire journey from beginning to end. The reason so many people feel overwhelmed is not because their problems are bigger than God, but because they keep trying to play God in their own lives. They try to plan every detail, fix every issue, and guarantee every outcome, forgetting that their Creator has already written their story. True freedom comes when you surrender that need to control and place it in the hands of the One who has never failed. God's peace is not the absence of problems, but the assurance of His presence. When you release control, you make room for that peace to guard your heart and mind. Worry and peace cannot coexist. One will always drive out the other. As long as you are holding on in fear, peace cannot enter. But when you let go and trust, peace begins to flood your soul like a river. It is a peace that does not make sense to the human mind, because it is not based on circumstances. It is based on God's unchanging nature. You may still face challenges, but you will face them with calmness instead of chaos. You may still experience storms, but you will not be shaken by them, because you know who is in control. The beauty of releasing control is that it lightens your burden. Imagine carrying a heavy load alone, struggling with every step, and then someone stronger comes and says, "Let me carry that for you." That is what God does. He invites you to cast your cares on Him because He cares for you. He invites you to exchange your weariness for His rest. Yet many refuse this invitation because they would rather struggle under the weight than trust someone else to carry it. Pride whispers, "I can handle this on my own," but humility says, "God, I need you." The moment you humble yourself and hand over the burden, you discover how much lighter life becomes. Releasing control also deepens faith. It forces you to trust God's timing instead of your own. Control wants immediate answers. Faith waits patiently knowing that God's timing is perfect. Control wants to see the whole plan. Faith is content with one step at a time. Control wants guarantees. Faith trusts in promises. The process of letting go is not easy because it goes against human instinct. But it is in that very act of surrender that you grow stronger spiritually. Each time you release control, your faith muscles grow and your confidence in God's faithfulness increases. Resting in God's peace is one of the greatest gifts you can experience. It is lying down at night without fear of tomorrow. It is walking into uncertainty without trembling. It is choosing to believe that no matter what happens, God is working all things together for your good. It is the calm assurance that your life is not spiraling out of control, because it rests in the hands of the One who holds the universe. When you rest in His peace, you no longer chase after control, because you realize you were never meant to hold it in the first place. You were meant to trust, to believe, and to live free.